Emily stopped my wife right in front of the glass doors of the mansion called The One, and said a sentence I still remember very clearly. Everyone agreed, Mom isn't welcome here. It was my son's wedding, and the person she was turning away was the groom's own mother. I stood there, still holding the envelope. Inside it was the payment for this ceremony, $350,000. Logan looked at us for a moment. Then he spoke softly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Dad, it's probably best if Mom goes back to the hotel and rests. That was the moment I understood something. Sometimes, the thing being pushed out of a wedding isn't just a person. Before I tell you what happened after that moment, if you're listening to this story, take a second to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I always read those messages. And now, let me tell you what happened right after we turned our backs and walked away from the doors of that wedding. I stood still for a few seconds. When you reach 70, you don't react as quickly as you did when you were young. But sometimes, silence says more than any answer ever could. Melissa was still holding my hand. I could feel it trembling a little. Not from the cold. At The One, the evening air is always warm and gentle, especially in the spring. The lights from the infinity pool behind the mansion reflected up into the Los Angeles sky, making everything look like a party scene from a movie. But we were standing outside the door. Melissa asked softly, so quietly that only I could hear. Paul, is she joking? Emily didn't answer her. She kept looking at Melissa, the way someone might examine an object that simply doesn't belong in the room. Melissa's dress was simple. She picked it herself a few weeks earlier, at a small shop near our house. After trying it on, she turned once in front of the mirror and asked me, Is this okay? I don't want Logan to feel embarrassed. I told her it was perfect. Now I understood what she had been worried about. Emily folded her arms. I think it's best if you both go back to the hotel, she said. There are many important guests inside. My father's business partners, a few investors, some people from the entertainment industry. They're here because of the image of this event. She paused, then continued, her voice light, like she was explaining a simple rule. I don't want any situations that might lower the value of the occasion. I looked at her. Emily, I said slowly, this is my son's wedding. She nodded quickly. Exactly, and that's why everything has to be perfect. Just then, the door behind her opened. Logan stepped outside. My son was wearing a black tuxedo. It fit him perfectly, shoulders straight, hair neatly styled. He looked like the kind of successful man you see on the cover of a business magazine. For one brief moment, I thought everything would end right there. I thought Logan would see his mother standing outside and say something. Melissa thought so too. I saw her eyes light up the moment she saw him. Logan, she said, trying to smile. But Logan didn't walk toward her. He stood beside Emily, looking at us as if he were handling an inconvenient situation. Dad, he said calmly, I think Emily is right. The air between us suddenly became very still. It's probably best if Mom goes back to the hotel and rests, Logan continued. There are a lot of strangers here. Mom wouldn't feel comfortable. Melissa blinked once. Just once. But I only wanted to sit in the back, she said. I don't need to go on stage. Emily let out a small breath, the way someone does when they're starting to lose patience. You don't understand, she said. The problem isn't where you sit. She glanced around the hall, where a few guests had already begun looking toward us with curiosity. We already discussed this, Emily said, and everyone agreed that it would be better if you didn't appear. I looked at Logan. Everyone, I asked. Logan avoided my eyes for a second. Dad, it's just about the image. I didn't say anything. In 40 years working in the aviation industry, I learned to observe before acting. An engineer doesn't react with emotion. He studies the system, finds the weak point, and decides when it's time to touch the switch. And at that moment, I started observing. The luxury cars lined up outside the gate, the lighting system across the lawn, a band testing their sound in the distance, waiters carrying trays of champagne through the glass corridors. Every detail of this wedding felt familiar to me, because I was the one who paid for all of it. Melissa gently pulled on my hand. Paul, she whispered, let's just go home. I looked at her. A single tear had just fallen down her cheek. But she wiped it away quickly, as if she didn't want anyone to see. I nodded. All right, I said. I didn't argue with Emily. I didn't say anything more to Logan. I simply placed my hand on Melissa's back and guided her toward our old car parked by the curb. As we walked down the marble steps of the One, I heard music starting behind us. The ceremony was about to begin. Melissa sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window. Maybe they're just worried, she said quietly, as if she were trying to find a gentle explanation for everything that had just happened. I started the car. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked back at the mansion one last time. The lights, the guests, the luxury, everything running smoothly, like a perfect system. But there was one thing Logan and Emily didn't know. That system still had a switch, and that switch had my name on it. I drove the car down the long slope that led away from the mansion. Behind us, the lights of the One slowly grew smaller in the rearview mirror. Melissa kept looking out the window. Los Angeles at night is always bright. But that evening, every light in the city only seemed to make one truth clearer. A truth both of us were trying not to face. After a long while, she finally spoke. Maybe they just wanted the ceremony to look perfect. I didn't answer right away. In 40 years as an engineer, I learned one simple thing. When a system begins to show signs of failure, the smartest move isn't to argue with it. It's to open the blueprint. I turned the car onto the coastal road, heading toward Malibu. The air out there is always quieter. About 30 minutes later, I stopped in front of a small diner overlooking the ocean. It wasn't fancy, but the soft yellow lights and the sound of the waves usually help people think more clearly. We sat at a table near the window. A server brought us 2 cups of hot tea. Melissa held hers, but barely drank. "Did I do something wrong, Paul?" she asked softly. I shook my head. No, she stayed quiet for a moment, then spoke again. Emily always spoke politely to me before. I took my phone out of my coat pocket. "Melissa," I said slowly, "there are a few things you should see." I opened a folder of documents I had been keeping for months. Copies of contracts, transfer confirmations, emails. Melissa leaned slightly closer to the screen. "What is this?" "The wedding account." She looked at me. "You already paid for everything." I nodded lightly. Almost. 8 months earlier, Logan had come to see me at the house. He sat across from me in my study, hands folded together like a student preparing to persuade his professor. "Dad," he said that day, "Emily's family cares a lot about image." I remember his next sentence very clearly. "If I want to stand on equal ground with them, I need a wedding that matches their level." I asked him what their level meant. Logan handed me a cost sheet. Venue the mansion called The One. Lighting system. Live band. Media services. Formal dinner. Estimated total cost, $350,000. Melissa was in the kitchen at the time. She didn't hear any of our conversation. Logan added one more thing. "I'll pay you back later, when my company finishes its funding round." I looked at him for a long time. Then I agreed. I sold the last patent I had kept from my years in the aviation industry, a small technology related to thermal control systems. It wasn't my biggest asset, but it was the last thing I had planned to keep for old age. $350,000 were transferred into the payment account for the wedding. I handed the phone to Melissa. She read each transfer confirmation slowly, line by line. "Paul, I didn't know about this. I didn't want you to worry." Melissa placed the phone back on the table. She took a deep breath, as if trying to reorganize her thoughts. "But if you paid for everything," she said quietly, "then why would they?" I opened another file. This was a document I had received only 2 days before the wedding. A notice from the bank. Melissa leaned closer to read. "A credit account?" she asked. "Not mine." She read a few more lines, then suddenly stopped. "Paul." I nodded. "That's right. In that file, Melissa's name appeared as a co-signer. A new credit account had been opened. Amount $100,000. Melissa looked at me, completely confused. "I never signed this." "I know. That money wasn't used for the venue or the dinner. According to the attached expense list, it had been used for things like an aerial photography helicopter, a convoy of exotic cars for the bridal entrance, and several promotional services Emily called Media Impact. Melissa slowly shook her head. But how could they use my name? I didn't answer immediately. I simply looked out the window, where the ocean waves rolled slowly toward the shore. There are two possibilities, I said after a moment. Either the bank made a mistake. I paused. Or someone signed for you. Melissa sat very still. Emily's words at the mansion door came back into my mind. You shouldn't appear here. A woman whose name had been used to open a $100,000 debt. Yet she wasn't even allowed to step inside the ceremony that debt helped pay for. Melissa finally spoke. Paul, they used me as a shield. I looked at her. For the first time that night, her voice was no longer trembling. It had simply grown deeper. I closed the phone. It seems that way. Outside, the Malibu ocean remained dark and quiet. Inside my mind, the last pieces of the system were beginning to lock together. A luxury wedding, $350,000, a credit account under Melissa's name, and that cold sentence at the mansion door. Everyone agreed. I took a sip of the tea, now already cold. Then I looked at Melissa. There's one thing Logan and Emily still don't understand. She raised her head. What is it? I answered very slowly. The person whose name is on the contract for that mansion is still me. Melissa looked at me for a few seconds after I said that. The person whose name is on the contract is you, I nodded. Not because I wanted to control everything, simply because Logan said the process would move faster if I signed it. He explained that his company was still in the middle of a funding round, and his financial records weren't stable yet. I didn't think much about it. A father usually doesn't think too hard when his son asks for help. Melissa sat quietly, both hands around her cup of tea that had already gone cold. Outside the window, the Malibu ocean was dark and calm. The waves moved in a steady rhythm, like a giant clock quietly counting time. Paul, she said softly, what are you going to do? I opened my phone again. In the aviation world, when a system fails, we don't shout at the control panel. We look for the right switch. Just one switch. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name. The property manager of the mansion, called The One. I had spoken with him many times during the 3 months of planning for the ceremony. I pressed the call button. The phone rang twice before he answered. Hello, Mr. Paul, the man said. I assume you're at the ceremony. I looked at the ocean for a second before answering. No, I said. I just left. There was a brief silence. How can I help you? I spoke slowly, almost as if I were reading from the contract itself. I'd like to update the payment status. The manager sounded a little surprised. Everything is currently operating normally. Our staff is serving. I want to withdraw as the paying party, I said, gently cutting him off. This time the silence lasted longer. I'm sorry. Could you repeat that I am no longer the payer for tonight's event? I said. I would like to terminate the use of my account for the remaining expenses. Melissa lifted her head and looked at me, but she didn't speak. The manager lowered his voice. Mr. Paul, the ceremony has already started. If you withdraw payment now, the entire service contract could be affected. I understand. That means lighting systems, security, catering, all of it may need new confirmation. I understand. Another pause. Finally, he asked, Are you sure? I looked out at the dark ocean. I remembered Melissa's eyes when she stood at the mansion door. I remembered Emily's words. Everyone agreed. I'm sure, I said. All right, the manager replied slowly. According to the contract, you do have that right. But I'll need to notify the event operations team immediately. I would also like to recover the unused portion of the deposit. We'll process it. I ended the call. Melissa let out a quiet breath. Paul, that could cause problems for the ceremony. I set the phone down on the table. Maybe. I didn't mention that this was only the first step. I opened my banking app. Another account appeared on the screen. It was the account Logan had been using for the past 6 months to pay the security team, the band, and the event organizers. It was a secondary account connected to a fund I managed. Logan had access to use it, but the final control was still mine. I tapped the access management section. A message appeared, confirm permission changes. I pressed approve. Within a few seconds, Logan's access disappeared from the list. Melissa looked at me. What did you just do? I closed the secondary account. She stayed quiet for a moment. Logan will call you. Probably. But I still wasn't finished. I opened the document folder again, the one containing the file for the $100,000 credit. opened under Melissa's name. After 40 years as an engineer, I'm not a lawyer, but I do understand one thing. Every financial system leaves a trace. I began writing an email. The first recipient was the legal department of the bank that issued the credit account. I attached copies of Melissa's signatures from earlier documents, along with the new contract. Even at a quick glance, the two signatures clearly didn't match. In the email, I wrote just one short line. I believe this account was opened without the consent of the person named on it. I request an immediate review. I paused for a second. Then, I added another recipient, an email address belonging to the board of directors of the real estate company owned by Emily's father. Not because I wanted to create noise, only because I thought they should know that a questionable credit account was connected to their family on the very day of the wedding. I sent the email. My phone screen went quiet again. Melissa looked at me for a long time. "Paul," she said, "you're dismantling the whole system." I took a sip of the cold tea. "No," I shook my head slightly. "I'm just turning off the parts they shouldn't have been using." Outside the window, the ocean wind moved gently across the water. Far away, on the other side of the city, the lights of the One were still glowing. The ceremony was probably at its most beautiful moment. Guests raising their glasses, music filling the air. But behind the stage, the systems were beginning to receive their notifications. And when a large system begins to lose power, it doesn't collapse all at once. It simply slows down, then piece by piece. Silence. Melissa and I stayed at the small diner by the ocean for a while longer. Neither of us spoke much. The things that needed to be done, I had already done. When a system loses power, it rarely stops immediately. It keeps running for a short time, as if it hasn't realized yet that something has changed. I imagine the mansion in Bel Air was the same. The music was still playing. Guests were still raising their glasses. Cameras were still capturing every moment of what Emily liked to call the wedding of the century. Only, behind those brightly lit walls, notifications were beginning to appear. About 40 minutes later, my phone vibrated. The caller's name showed on the screen. Logan. I let it ring once before answering. "Dad," his voice came through, a little rushed. "Where are you? I'm in Malibu." A short silence. "Dad, what happened to the account?" I looked out at the ocean. "Why do you ask?" "The event team says some payments just got shut down," Logan said. "The backup lighting system and the band are waiting for confirmation." He tried to sound calm, but I could hear the tension behind his voice. "Maybe they should ask the payer," I said. "But you are the payer." I withdrew. On the other end of the line, Logan went silent. 1 second. 2 seconds. "Dad, what did you say? I'm no longer the payer for the ceremony." I could hear the noise behind him, voices speaking quickly, footsteps rushing across a stone floor. "You can't do that in the middle of the ceremony," Logan said, his voice lower now. "Emily is about to go on stage." I didn't answer. Someone else seemed to say something to him. Logan stepped a few paces away. "Wait," he told the person beside him. Then he returned to the phone. "Dad, this isn't the time to make a scene." I let out a quiet breath. "Logan." "Yes, tonight at the mansion door. What did you say to your mother?" On the other end, Logan didn't answer right away. "I just want to hear it again," I said. He exhaled. "I only said, it would be better if Mom went back to the hotel." "No." My voice was very calm. "You said, everyone thinks that's for the best." Logan didn't speak. I continued. "Then perhaps everyone should be prepared for the rest of it." I ended the call before he could say anything else. Melissa looked at me. "Is Logan panicking?" "I think so." We left the diner not long after. I drove along the coastal road. On the car radio, a local news program played soft background music. A little more than an hour after we had left the mansion, my phone vibrated again. This time, it wasn't Logan. It was the property manager from the One. I put the call on speaker. "Mr. Paul," the man said. His voice sounded more tense than before. "I think you should know what's happening here." "What is it?" "After you withdrew the payment, several services were paused. We're trying to contact the event organizers to confirm a new paying party." He paused, then continued. "But there's another issue." "I'm listening." "The bank just sent a notice about the credit account under Mrs. Melissa's name. They're requesting an immediate review." Melissa looked at me. I kept my voice calm. "And That caught the attention of the legal department at the real estate company. He lowered his voice. Emily's father is here tonight. He just received the email. I could imagine the scene. A ballroom full of lights, guests in tuxedos and evening gowns, and a powerful man reading an email at the worst possible moment. The ceremony is quite chaotic right now, the manager said. Guests are being asked to step away from the stage area while we review the contracts. Melissa took a quiet breath. Are the lights still on? She asked softly. The manager heard her through the speaker. For now, the main system is still running, he said. But if we don't receive new payment confirmation, we'll have to suspend all services within 30 minutes according to policy. I nodded, though he couldn't see it. I understand. There's one more thing, he said. We just received a request from the bank and local authorities to meet with Miss Emily and Mr. Logan to clarify some financial records. Melissa looked at me. You mean, the manager answered carefully. Just a formal discussion. I thanked him and ended the call. Inside the car, there was only the quiet sound of the engine and the wind through the window. Melissa looked out at the dark road. Paul, she said after a while, our son's wedding. I knew what she was about to say. I kept my hands on the steering wheel. Melissa. Yes, I didn't ruin the ceremony. She turned and looked at me. I simply stopped funding. A ceremony you weren't even allowed to enter. The car continued down the coastal road. On the other side of the city, inside the brightly lit mansion called The One, the wedding Emily had hoped to turn into a perfect performance was probably beginning to lose the ground beneath it, not with loud noise, but with the quiet silence of systems being switched off. I drove a little farther, then pulled into a small parking area overlooking the ocean. Nights in Malibu are quiet. Not many lights, just the steady sound of the waves, and a faint smell of salt in the air. Melissa stepped out of the car first. She walked over to the wooden railing and looked down at the dark water. I didn't say anything for a few minutes. After so many years together, we've grown used to silences like that. Not the silence of distance, but the kind that gives each person time to sort through their thoughts. My phone vibrated again. Logan. This time I answered right away. His voice had lost the calm tone from earlier. Dad, things are getting bad here. Behind him, I could hear a lot of voices. Doors opening, fast footsteps across the stone floor. How bad? I asked. The management team asked everyone to leave the main area. Some services have already stopped. He paused for a second. And the bank is asking about the credit account. I didn't reply. Logan lowered his voice. Emily is really panicking. Could you call them and say it's just a misunderstanding? I looked at Melissa. She was still facing the ocean, but I knew she was listening. Logan, I said slowly. Do you remember standing at the mansion door tonight? On the other end, Logan went quiet. You said everyone agreed your mother wasn't welcome. I continued. Dad, I just want to be sure you remember. Logan exhaled. I didn't think things would go this far, but they did. A long silence followed. Finally, Logan spoke again, his voice almost pleading. Dad, if this spreads outside, Emily's family will lose face. Their company, too. I leaned back against the car door. You're calling me because of their reputation? No, He stopped, searching for different words. I need your help. I didn't answer immediately. In my working life, I've seen many projects fail. Not because the technology was too complex, but because people ignored one simple rule. A system cannot stay stable if its foundation is neglected. Families are the same way. Logan, I said after a moment. Do you remember who paid for this wedding? Of course. You did. And do you remember who was standing outside the door tonight? There was no answer. Only the sound of wind through the phone. I won't push things any further, I said. I've already notified the bank. They'll handle the rest. And Emily, that's between her and her family. Logan lowered his voice again. Dad, I was wrong. I heard that sentence very clearly. But I didn't feel the relief some people might expect. A father is never truly happy, hearing those words from his son. I hope you understand why this happened, I said. I do. No, I replied gently. You're only beginning to understand. I ended the call. Melissa turned and looked at me. What did Logan say? Things are pretty chaotic at the mansion. She nodded slowly. We stood beside each other for a while, looking out at the ocean. Waves rolled against the rocks, again and again, like the slow rhythm of breathing. After a moment, Melissa spoke. Paul, Yes, I don't want to live the rest of my life carrying the feeling from tonight. I looked at her. What do you mean? Standing outside the door, she said calmly. I don't want to carry that feeling with me for the rest of my life. I understood. Melissa isn't the kind of person who holds on to resentment. In the 40 years I've known her, what makes her strong isn't anger. It's the way she turns difficult things into something useful. What do you think we should do? I asked. She thought for a moment. We spent $350,000, she said. If we can recover the unused part, I'd like to use it for something else. For what? Melissa turned toward me. The dim light from the parking area fell gently across her face. I want to open a small center. What kind of center? Job training, she said. For women who've been looked down on or left behind. She gave a small smile. Maybe women who know what it feels like to stand outside a door. I watched her for a few seconds. In that moment, I was reminded of something I've respected about Melissa for 40 years. She doesn't turn hurt into bitterness. She turns it into something useful. All right, I said. We'll do that. Melissa nodded, as if a simple decision had just been completed. We walked back to the car. I opened the trunk and took out a small picnic basket Melissa had packed that morning, just in case the wedding ran late. Inside were 2 glasses and a bottle of champagne. We sat on the wooden steps near the sand, opened the bottle, and poured 2 glasses. Far away, the city of Los Angeles was still glowing with light. Somewhere in that city, news of a luxurious wedding suddenly interrupted was probably beginning to spread. But here on this beach, everything was quiet. Melissa raised her glass. For what? I asked. She thought for a second, then said, for the fact that we're still here. I clinked my glass against hers. A moment later, Melissa looked out at the ocean and added, Paul, do you ever think true luxury isn't about where we stand? I followed her gaze. The ocean was dark, but peaceful. I think it's about how we treat the people who walk the whole road with us. We sat there a long time, listening to the waves and watching the distant city lights. A wedding can end in chaos, but a life can still continue in a better direction. If this story made you think even a little about family, about respect, about gratitude, I hope you'll take a second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with someone who might need to hear. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. Life sometimes pushes us to chase appearances, reputation, and things that look perfect. But in the end, what truly holds a family together isn't money or status. It's kindness and gratitude. And I hope that after this story, each of us will remember to appreciate a little more the people who have been beside us since the very beginning.